So just to say a little bit about the text that we have on the event page. It's under course materials for tonight. It's also under course materials for Geshe-la's class. Unfortunately, Geshe-la can't be with us here tonight. I hope that was clear to everyone. So he asked that we make the best of it and kind of do a little bit of a group discussion and also do a practice of Vajrasattva. So there is a text, if you will, course material text. It's technically three different things that were put together. It's not like one thing that you would find. There's a motivation by Lama Zopa, and then there's an extract from a sadhana practice, which is the actual practice. And then there's sort of the common prayers that we often do at the end. But we sort of put those three things together. Geshe-la hasn't had a chance to teach on that sadhana practice. Well, the Vajrasattva variation that's extracted from a sadhana practice. He hasn't had a chance to teach on that, so I also am not going to teach on that specifically, but we will do a Vajrasattva practice. And as I say, we are going to have a bit of a discussion as well. I would say in general, of course, it's always best for questions to go to Geshe-la. He'll be here again next week. And so in general, it's better for him to answer questions. But if you do feel like you have a question that's maybe more well suited for this kind of group discussion format, then please feel free to go ahead and ask that if you feel like this is the best forum. But of course, Geshe-la is the best person to address. And any questions related to the text, the practice that's that should go to Geshe-la next week. Okay, so that's just a little bit about the format. So probably the last 20, 30 minutes. This is just an hour tonight, so not 8:30, just 8 o'clock. And the last maybe 20, 30 minutes, we will engage in a Vajrasattva practice. So the first 30, 40 minutes, we'll kind of have a little bit of talk about Vajrasattva. So please participate, in the talk. So we will begin by setting our motivation, and we are going to use for that the text. So we won't use the practice component, but we will use the motivation that we put together for that. So let me do that. I cannot. Yep, excellent. So that's that's the motivation that we are using for the text that we put together. So I trust all of you can read, but I will read it anyway. So you can close your eyes and just focus on the meaning of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's motivation. So Lama Zopa says, each of us needs to think like this. All sentient beings have been extremely kind to me in the past. They're kind to me in the present. They will continuously be kind to me in the future. They are the field from which I receive all my pleasure, past, present, and future. All my perfections come from other sentient beings. Therefore, I must attain enlightenment. Seeking everlasting happiness for myself alone, not caring about other sentient beings, giving them up, having no concern for their welfare is selfish. Therefore, I must attain enlightenment. the most sublime happiness in order to release all the sentient beings from suffering and lead them on the path to enlightenment by myself alone, as this is my responsibility. So I'll pause and just take a moment and reflect on Lama Zopa's motivation and try to adopt that as your motivation for being here as best you can. All right. And then we will, yes, there's a question in the Gompa. It seems to me that I was um, so the could you restate it?
It seems like to me that almost every creature that crawls or walks or swims, when it ages or before it ages, it gets eaten by another creature. That doesn't seem like an act of kindness, though I'm not sure. That's my question.
So does that, in your mind, contradict?
Yes, that contradicts that all creatures have been kind to me.
So what I would say is that if we have the karma to experience being harmed, then we will be harmed. If we don't have the karma to experience being harmed, then we won't be harmed. And so we can't really say, I mean, it's certainly true that the natural world is a violent place, but that kind of ebb and flow of karma, for one, it's not helpful. I mean, of course, we can focus, if we want to, we can focus on things that are problematic. And there's a time and a place to focus on things that are problematic. For example, when you're trying to generate renunciation of cyclic existence, it makes sense to think about and to focus on the problematic aspects of cyclic existence. It is also true that all sentient beings have Buddha potential, and that is the highest, best state for oneself and all other sentient beings to end up in. So wishing that for sentient beings is something that is incredibly beneficial, even if we want peace and happiness for oneself, even if we want to end up in a state beyond suffering, having the wish for sentient beings to be free of suffering. And to get to that, it is very helpful to focus on not the times when, due to our negative karma, we experienced harm, but all of the times when we experience incredible benefit. That generates a sense of warmth and closeness to sentient beings, which easily helps us to move into wishing them well. And so we could as I said, we could only focus on the things that are not beneficial and not positive. But then we're just making it harder for ourselves to even attain our own highest welfare, because all of our views will be colored by that, what in Buddhism would really be called kind of inappropriate attention, is sort of the technical, where you have the opportunity to think of, to focus on, to accentuate the benefits. And instead, you're like, well, no, how dare this happen and how dare that? Because that is going to feed the kind of narrow, egoistic self preoccupation that we have to only ever be treated perfectly, kindly, etc. And that's going to take us further away. Even if we're only interested in our own welfare, that kind of narrow, egoistic perspective will take us away from achieving that welfare. Um, so, like I say, there is a time and a place when we're developing renunciation where we think about like that the natural world is not a place that we want to take rebirth because of all of the churning negativities that are there. But we see them as the ripening of our own karma in a way, which also leads us to renounce creating the causes of that suffering rather than blaming and externalizing. Okay, so we'll also do refuge and bodhicitta. Uh, I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, until enlightenment is achieved. I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha until enlightenment is achieved. I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha until enlightenment is achieved. And again, reassert your bodhicitta motivation, thinking of the kindness of sentient beings, wanting to repay that kindness and recognizing that only by achieving one's own enlightenment can we repay the kindness of sentient beings. And the way in which we repay their kindness is to bring them to their enlightenment. So we develop that aspiration, that wish to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of sentient beings. So like I said, we will focus on a little bit of discussion about Vajrasattva practice. So last week, the first class in Lama and Geshe Sherab's series, he spent a lot of time talking about the importance of how we approach Vajrasattva practice. And I wanted to just share some of the thoughts that I also had, listening to his teaching and the reflections that occurred to me, because, he spent a lot of time on that in the first class. And I do think it's really important. He was highlighting that, and even if you look at, a number of the texts that we have that are related to purification practice, they're pretty heavy. They really hammer home a lot of these mistakes, these non-virtues that we've created in the past, and and of course that's related to the generation of regret. And maybe we'll talk a bit about the four opponent powers. So it isn't to say that it isn't necessary. It is necessary to think about these negativities, but as Geshe-la was really encouraging us, we can't let it get to a point, or we have to find a way of working with purification that doesn't give rise to feelings of guilt or feelings of, I am one with these mistakes that have occurred. And in some ways, I think, in one way of looking at the kinds of words that are used, in one way of looking, they don't seem positive. They may even reinforce that mistaken way of thinking about mistaken actions. And I'm thinking of words like defilement and words like stain, which you come across, in these texts, and that can feel very heavy to think that there are defilements in my mind. But if we look at it in a little bit different way, we can ask the question, what is it that we think of as that which can be defiled, that which can be stained? And the kinds of things that we think of in that category are things that are precious, things that are important, things that are not in their nature that defilement or that stain, like the clear light nature of the mind that Geshe-la was talking about, last week. So I do think, as it I was in agreement with everything that Geshe-la was saying, of course, about finding a way to connect purification practice to a sense of joy and lightness in our practice, rather than, which is true of all of the practices that we do, all of the meditations that we do. We should be finding ways of connecting them to a sense of joy and lightness, and even kind of a playfulness, kind of an attitude of I get to rather than I have to. So one way that we can do that, one, as I mentioned, is coming back to what is true about our nature, what is true, which is that we have Buddha potential. We have the potential to achieve enlightenment. And so instead of, maybe these words that seem heavier, we can think of also a very common word, which is obscuration. In one of the variations of the practice, there's a line, all that obscures this awakening mind is one of the lines in an FPMT practice on Vajrasattva. So, and of course we're told that the defilements, the stains are adventitious, they are removable. But then also that we have these words that are quite, loaded. But if we just think of obscuration like a cloud or like something in front of something else, the thing behind it is not affected. The thing behind it is in no way influenced. It's just that it's covered. It's just that there's something in the way. We can't perceive what's behind. So we can think, instead of all of these heavy kinds of ways of thinking about beginningless past lives, and there's killing and stealing and lying and all of these different things, and I must in over beginningless past lives have done the most intense sorts of things. Unavoidably, it's true that these are potentials that have been laid down in the mind due to past mistaken actions motivated by afflicted states of mind. And so we don't have to think of it as our fault, but we do have to think of it as our responsibility, because it is our mind, the mind that was associated with the form that engaged in the action is the mind that's associated with this form. It's the same continuity of mind. But we can think, how extraordinary is it that there are methods that have been taught that purify these adventitious stains. And we can focus on how, that we're not powerless, that it isn't hopeless. As Geshe-la was saying, with 100,000, and of course, 100,000, maybe there are some preconditions in terms of the strength of a person's concentration. I mean, there are factors that influence that, but we can make progress on all of those factors. We can make progress on the strength of our concentration. We can make progress on the strength of our bodhicitta. So all of the perhaps factors in the mind that influence how effective purification practice is, we can make progress on. And we have these extraordinary methods taught by the Buddha for fulfilling not only our desires, but also connecting it to a sense of bodhicitta motivation, which I think is another really important way of kind of getting out of our narrow egoistic self-perception, where because we have this view of karma and the result of karma being like a suffering that I will experience, quote unquote, I will experience. But really, we're talking about a karma that's likely to ripen in a future life. So, in that way, we can think of, we can try to not think about it in a narrow, egoistic way. But for one, we can think, I want to leave a really positive experience for that sentient being, because the negativities that we've experienced in this life likely, were the result of, yes, the same continuity of mind, but in a past life, a mistake that was made. And now, in a way that's really unconnected to that action, that result is ripening. And unfortunately, that's how it works. The ripening result and the cause are separated by lifetimes very often, almost always. And so the harm, the suffering that's going to be experienced really is going to be experienced by a different sentient being. So we can think in one way of taking care of those future sentient beings, and not trying to think about it in a heavy personal way, but thinking about it as an act of love and compassion for those sentient beings, and also thinking about it in terms of that meaningless, unconnected suffering is going to make it simply more difficult and longer for me to achieve enlightenment. That means sentient beings will have to wait longer and they will suffer longer. So again, connecting it to bodhicitta motivation and not like something terrible is going to happen to me, and this, which is going to feed that narrow egoistic self, preoccupation that really we're trying to get rid of, in Buddhism in general. So it's really important that we not see karma in a moralistic way, where we think of reward and punishment, but it's really just the flow of energy kind of through a system. It's the law of cause and effect. There is a cause that's created and there is a result that will flow from that cause. But when we think, and particularly with regard to other people, and the negative karma that they create, we should try to give up this view of wanting them to experience that result, because purification practice is cutting that off. That's the point of purification practice. But if we recognize that the suffering is meaningless when it's separated by lifetimes, that really you're not going to learn anything. Yes, we want people to learn. We want to learn from our negative actions, and we want other people to learn from their negative actions, of course. But the ripening of karma really isn't the way to do that, because it's separated by so many, millions of years in many cases, that you can't learn that hell being in the future isn't going to learn anything about what act of killing happened in a past life. So there's nothing wrong in that sense about wanting to cut off this negativity, wanting to put an end to this negativity for ourselves, and also wanting others to accomplish that as well, because they won't ultimately, within the law of karma, they won't benefit from that suffering result that's coming. So, and again, connecting it back to bodhicitta and thinking that all of that suffering, all of those lifetimes that I will be experiencing in that suffering result is only going to serve to delay my enlightenment and cause additional unnecessary suffering for sentient beings. I won't grow from it, and I will be prevented from benefiting sentient beings. So those were some of the reflections that I had. Um, I thought it might be interesting for people to, the mantra can kind of be translated into English. Um, so I thought it might be interesting for people to hear the English translation of the mantra. FPMT has it done, they have it both like a word by word, and they also have kind of the meaning of it. So I'll just read sort of the meaning of it. Uh, so you, Vajrasattva, have generated the holy mind of bodhicitta according to your samaya. Your holy mind is enriched with the simultaneously born holy action of liberating transmigratory beings from samsara. Whatever happiness and suffering, good and bad, happens to me by my pleasing the holy mind, never give me up and guide me. Please stabilize the realizations of the paths and bhumis, including the happiness of the upper realms, actualize all actions and the common and sublime realizations, and make the glory of the five wisdoms abide in my heart. So it's a supplication to Vajrasattva. You're trying to make this connection with Vajrasattva. You're, reminding Vajrasattva of his pledges, and you are requesting, the blessing energy of Vajrasattva. Last week, Geshe-la, explained that Vajrasattva made very special prayers that his enlightened state be used, could be used when people invoke his energy, that it could be used in a way to help sentient beings overcome their negativity. So, as we, it's good to keep in mind that because if you just understand the Tibetan, you might not have a real feeling of what you're requesting, what you're supplicating to. When you recite the 100-syllable mantra. Yes.
I want to make sure I got this. So Vajrasattva is a deity.
Deity and enlightened being are essentially the same thing. A deity or a yidam is an enlightened being for whom we have like practices that we can do in relation to.
Okay.
So,
And Vajrasattva became realized enlightenment and offered or prayed for, or that his enlightenment would be accessible by Buddhist students or people, or in order to further their their movement along the Dharma path, and to help them clean out these negative acts and mistaken acts and that sort of thing. That's it.
mm-hmm.
So when we say this, we do this Vajrasattva. When we say this mantra, is that what it is? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We're sort of invoking that for ourselves, that their enlightenment should be kind of a light to our path. That's right.
Yeah, so due to the power of prayer, enlightened beings can use their enlightenment in particular ways that they have dedicated for. And so, during the Bodhisattva grounds and paths, when a person is training, the prayers that they make um, for their enlightenment to be of benefit in a particular way, then under the power of that prayer, those stainless prayers and aspirations, then they can create a relationship. And of course, we're the ones creating that relationship through our intentional action, visualizing Vajrasattva, engaging in the mantra, the nectars and the lights. And so we're the, Vajrasattva's energy is universal, but we're the ones that are trying to become receptive to that by engaging in the practice.
Yep. So I asked this question many years ago to a Lama about how, specifically about actually Vajrasattva, that just so happens, about how these prayers work. Like, how is it that, if I make these prayers, then how is it that by the enlightened beings, something, energy comes and helps me purify? So what he said was, the analogy he used is like in the compounding, they had the compounding pharmacies. I don't know if they still have them or not. Compounding pharmacies. And so, so the pharmacist makes you go to the pharmacist and you ask for some kind of medication, some pill. So he makes the pill with his knowledge and his special powers or whatever. And he creates this set of pills for you, right? For you to fix your sickness or become well again. The pills work regardless of whether the pharmacist is there or not, right? The pharmacist could die and you take the pills, but the power of the analogy he was using was that Vajrasattva is the power of his samaya, right? The promise or the commitment he made that whoever comes and supplicates, makes prayers, will be able to use this energy. That's, even though he may not be present in body and whatever in front of us, but those prayers, that's how they work. So that was very helpful for me.
What is Samaya?
Well, there's Samaya is like the power, not power, but their commitment. Have certain, like they call it Samaya vows, for example, right? So there's like like Vajrasattva said that, when I am enlightened, or for example, when Chenrezig said that, if anyone comes to me, I will immediately be of help through my compassion, right? So that's kind of the Samaya.
That is a Samaya.
Sorry?
That is a Samaya.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have anything they would like to, any thoughts or
Yes,
reflections?
Venerable Dondrub, I have a question, and that is, am I
people on
correct
Zoom?
in the way I'm seeing this? Vajrasattva is not a deity that grants us something, like we ask for it, give
There's a
me this,
question or
and
a comment in the
grants.
phone book. One second.
I've heard someone refer to it this way, that it's like radio waves fill the universe. And Vajrasattva's radio station, you tune in to his radio station.
Anyone on Zoom or?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
I was just getting the microphone.
Oh. Susan on Zoom has a.
Am I correct?
The notion of karma is actually pretty new to me. Can you talk about, I in my mind, I kind of have like the world divided into two. There's studying and practice towards enlightenment, and then there's like cessation of suffering, kind of pleasures with food and such. Can you talk about karma on like bridging those two places and, where, and I'm speaking really for myself, my cessation of suffering versus practicing.
So, I mean, I don't know if we're on the same page in terms of, yeah, in our discussion about the definition of the cessation of suffering. The cessation of suffering is the goal of practice. Ultimately, all of the practices that the Buddha gave, they are designed to lead a person to the cessation of suffering. And karma, the law of cause and effect, is getting at. I mean, of course, we don't have a long. I mean, it's a very detailed subject. It refers to the energy that is present in the mind of the sentient being engaging in an intentional action. So often we'll talk about positive and negative karma, but those are talked about in terms of overt actions, because technically the word karma, you'll hear people say the word means action, but it doesn't mean really a observable action. It kind of means a movement of mind. That movement of mind precedes the observable action, the stealing or the generosity or the killing or the protecting of life. You observe a cockroach and you can decide, do I kill it? Do I preserve its life? You see someone drop a $10 bill, you can think, do I steal it? Do I give it back? And what you do, your action, the observable action, is impelled by the movement of mind that preceded it. And really, as I mentioned before, it's critically important that we not understand karma in a moralistic way, that we not think of it as the Buddha making up a system of behavior that is pro-social, is good for people, is good for society. It isn't that. It's the Buddha's observation that certain mental states that precede or impel observable actions, they leave an imprint in the mind, and the mind and external reality are deeply, subtly linked. And because of that, in the future, that seed, that karmic potential, that karmic seed will ripen as experience. And we want experiences. Enlightenment is simply something that is permitted by the laws of nature. It's not designed by other Buddhas. It's not, it's just a state of mind that's permitted by whatever the totality of the natural world is. Just like being unenlightened is permitted by those laws of nature. But enlightenment has advantages, and ordinary cyclic existence has disadvantages. So it makes sense. The Buddha basically said, hey, this is something I discovered. This is something that I've experienced, I've observed, and there are benefits. And so why not try to get those benefits and also want them for other sentient beings as well? So positive actions are actions that have as their cause a motivation, a prior, the moment of mind, the movement of mind is one in which there was a desire, a wish, an interest in benefiting, in being of some benefit. And so it is a sort of open, expansive way of relating. And it is, broadly speaking, in line with what's true about sort of the interconnected nature of all things. And a negative quote unquote negative state of mind is one in which the motivation is very, very self-serving, very, very cut off from that truth of interdependence, interrelatedness. And it is something that feeds our natural tendency to be preoccupied with our ego identity. And so it brings a suffering result. It agitates both of these states of mind when they arise. A virtuous state of mind is pleasant, is beneficial even when it arises, and it brings a beneficial result. And a negative state of mind is agitating, painful, disturbing when it arises, and it brings a suffering result. And this is just an observation that the Buddha made about how energy moves through the mind and interacts with reality. So in one way of speaking, everything that the Buddha taught is teaching us what to adopt and what to abandon, what to practice and what to discard. And all of that is aiming at cessation of suffering.
Thank you.
Anything?
We have a question
Yes,
online.
Susan had a question, and then, oh, there's lots of. Susan is first. Susan is first in the queue.
Thank you, Venerable Dondrub. I think I got it answered, but,
No, maybe.
well, just to confirm, can you
maybe
hear me?
because I'm not
Oh,
connected to.
Can you hear her, Venerable?
We should unmute. Can somebody unmute the center's computer in the back? I thought.
It's okay,
didn't do
Michael. I
this
think I got
in
it
the right
answered.
way. No, we just can't hear them.
Can you hear us now?
It's just the system sound in the tray. So you'll have to minimize and go to the tray.
Can you hear us now? I'm surprised he can't hear us because he's on his computer. Unless, of course, that is only a microphone and not a earbud as well, which it probably is.
No, the system sound on the computer. All right, Susan, can you ask your question again?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, well, I think I got my question answered, but I'll try to keep it really short. So Vajrasattva is not actually a deity from its own side. It is some kind of a mental representation that we tap into its energy to, in other words, it's not a god that we ask, will you do this for us? And then Vajrasattva does it. It's not like that type of a interaction. Is that correct?
So deity, in my mind, isn't a helpful word because of our, Judeo-Christian backgrounds, but it is not. It's a common translation of the word yidam, and so it's kind of up to. I don't know if there's a right or a wrong answer, but in one way of thinking, it's kind of up to the practitioner to decide how to think about it. In one way, when we think about Avalokiteshvara, when we think of Tara, when we think of, Maitreya, when we think of, all of these enlightened beings for whom we have practices that we can engage in to create a connection with that enlightened being, it is understood that all enlightened beings possess all of those perfected qualities. And so in one way of thinking, it isn't that Maitreya is only one thing and Tara is only one thing and Avalokiteshvara is only one thing. But for us as ordinary sentient beings, we learn better that way is kind of how I think of it. That we can only kind of focus on one thing. The inconceivable nature of enlightened mind is something we really can't wrap our heads around. But we can think about love and compassion and overcoming problems and purification. We can think about the individual qualities. So you could make the argument, perhaps, that this is a manifestation of a particular quality that is really just for one's own benefit, irrespective of whether one thinks that there was a specific person who is now known as Vajrasattva when that specific person achieved enlightenment. That's another way of thinking about it. And I really kind of just feel like it's up to what is suitable for the practitioner to decide whether it is sort of just the universal energy that's manifesting in a particular way. But it is certainly the case that it is related to enlightened mind, enlightened activity. So it is something beyond simply our mind as it is now. It is creating a relationship to an energy that is beyond us as an individual practitioner. And we are intentionally creating a relationship to that energy. And that energy does have beneficial effects that we wouldn't receive if we never created that receptivity, is how I think. So there is a reason why we do Vajrasattva practice, and we don't just hope that our negativity goes away. I mean, there are specific benefits to creating a relationship to enlightened energy. But there is no concept of God in the Christian way of thinking about it in Buddhism. It's just an English translation of the word yidam, which we're kind of stuck with.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Michael and Shayla, did you have?
No, I just had my hand. We were just trying to get your attention for Suzanne.
Okay. Is that what was going on? Okay. Any other? And then we'll do practice. Yep. Oh, good. All right. So let's try to get into a meditative posture best we can. Thinking about keeping our feet flat and our back straight. Torso open. And just relaxing into a stable, comfortable, upright position. And we'll take a moment to concentrate our awareness on the sensation of the air moving into and back out of the tip of the nostrils. Trying to notice quickly when anything other than that one physical sensation is arising in the mind, and without experiencing judgment or frustration, we simply let go of those distractions and focus again and again on the breath. Now we will engage in a meditation on the four opponent powers, which is going to incorporate Vajrasattva. This is the method that we use to cut off the ripening of negative karma. It's a very psychological, even scientific way of understanding the power of karma and how to prevent, again, that needless, pointless suffering. So we generate the power of regret, the first of the four opponent powers. So we think back over our day, our week, and think of any times that we acted selfishly. We acted under the influence of affliction, when anger arose in the mind, or jealousy, and covetousness, ill will. And a mistaken action arose. You just think of those mistaken actions like poison. This is the cause of my suffering, and I do not want to suffer. If I do suffer, I will not be of benefit to sentient beings. So for their sake, I should achieve enlightenment as quickly as possible by completely purifying anything that would take me away from that state, anything that would delay my enlightenment. Then we generate the power of reliance. Thinking that we're turning to enlightened mind, enlightened activity. These incredible methods. We visualize Vajrasattva above the crown of our head, about the size of the palm of one's hand, thinking of him as inseparable from one's own guru. The holy mind of all the Buddhas. He's composed of radiant, blissful white light. He's seated cross-legged on a white lotus. His face is radiant and beautiful. His eyes are long and peaceful and full of love and compassion. embracing us and all sentient beings. His arms are crossed at his heart, left underneath the right, the left holding a bell representing wisdom, the right a Vajra, which represents the indestructibility of compassion. And their crossing represents the union of wisdom and compassion, enlightenment itself. So pause and try to stabilize that visualization, thinking that through the power of our concentration, we invoke that living energy, and recollect your fervent desire to be free of all the obscurations. And think that Buddha Vajrasattva sends powerful white light and nectar flowing from his heart, entering your crown, filling your body and mind completely. Thinking that it forces out all negativity through the soles of your feet in the form of inky black smoke or liquid. All negativity of body, speech, and mind completely eliminated. And as you engage in that visualization, you join it with a recitation of Vajrasattva's mantra. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Deno Patita Deda Me Bhava Sutukaya Me Bhava Supukaya Me Bhava Anartha Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayata Sarva Karma Susame Sitam Shriyam Kuruvum Ahaha Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tatakata Vajramame Munta Vajrabhava Mahasamaya Sattva Om Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Deno Patita Deda Me Bhava Sutukaya Me Bhava Supukaya Me Bhava Anartha Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayata Sarva Karma Susame Sitam Shriyam Kuru Hung Ha Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tathagata Vajramame Munta Vajrabhava Mahasamaya Sattva Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Deno Patita Deda Me Bhava Sutukaya Me Bhava Supukaya Me Bhava Anarata Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayata Sutsame Sitam Shriyam Kuru Hung Ha O Bhagavan Sarva Tathagata Vajramame Munta Vajrabhava Mahasamaya Sattva Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Deno Patita Deda Me Bhava Sutukaya Me Bhava Supukaya Me Bhava Anarata Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Brahma Susame Sitam Shriyam Kuru Hung Ha Bhagavan Sarvatatakata Vajrapa Mitsa Vajrapa Mahasamaya Sattva Om. Very gently continue to recite the mantra as you visualize these light rays and nectars completely obliterating all negative karma. Vajrasattva. Om Vajrasattva Sammaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Deno Patita Delo Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anarato Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayata Sarva Karma Susame Sitam Shriyam Guru Aho Bhagavan Sarva Tathagata Vajra Me Mutsa Vajraba Vamahasamaya Sattva Aum Be. Generate a sense of complete confidence that all negativity of body, speech, and mind has been completely eliminated, not one atom left. Rest in that state of body and mind being clean and clear like a crystal. And try to think of a negativity that you wish to work on and engage in the power of resolve. Try to set a determination for a realistic period of time. It could be a day, an hour, or a few minutes. A strong determination to watch the mind, notice the arising of negativity, and be resolved for that length of time to make a strong effort to avoid engaging in that negativity. Also generate a general determination to be mindful of negativities and do your best to avoid engaging in negative actions. I think that Vajrasattva is delighted with your practice and your pledge. And Vajrasattva melts into white light and absorbs into the crown of your head in a replica, a tiny replica of Vajrasattva alights at the heart center. I think that your body, speech, and mind are inseparably one with Buddha Vajrasattva's holy body, holy speech, and holy mind. Rest your mind in that sense of union. And then when you're ready, we'll come back together. And we'll dedicate. So recollect your motivation. Think that by having engaged in this practice, you've actualized that motivation, which has created positive energy in the mind. And that positive energy will ripen in beneficial ways. So think about giving away that positive energy for the benefit of all sentient beings without exception. Thinking of the spiritually beneficial, supportive ways in which you want to offer your practice. Thinking of all of those that we're karmically connected to. The suffering happening in Ukraine and Israel and Palestinian region. All of the conflict and harm happening around the world. And thinking the solution is to achieve enlightenment and lead all sentient beings to their enlightenment. All right. If you want to offer a dedication, do you want to?
And so we're also dedicating the practice today to Leah's partner's father who passed away on Sunday. And to Mummy Max who broke her wrist today.
Okay, I know, I'm sorry, we went over. I'm not in a rush. If there are any questions, or anything that anybody wants to, address that wasn't addressed, that would be helpful to address, we can do that if people need to go, of course. And there may not be. Karen, did you have?
No, it's just a comment. My wonderful young Angoran cat who has thumbs is always fascinated by Geshe Cherub's talks on YouTube and sits and puts his head on the computer. And he did it with you tonight too. He was in rapt attention. So I just wanted to let you know. I call him Geshe Fergus.
I hope he got some good imprints from the mantra.
Well, he must be a reincarnation of a human who did something bad, I guess.
All right. Well, I appreciate everyone for coming. Geshe, thankfully, will be back with us next Wednesday to carry on. And also Sunday for his, but yes, in terms of this series, on Wednesday, he'll pick up where he left off. And he teaches also again on Sunday. So thank you all for coming.